Good morning, everybody, and happy Wednesday to you. Today's show is brought to you by, of all people, John Lennon, who says, "Every child is an artist until he's told he's not an artist." Every child is an artist until he's told he's not an artist. I think that's a good morning. Well, thank you very much. I'm working on the painting being painterly, and that one came out okay, but it doesn't have the exact painterly look I'm looking for yet. It certainly came out fine. I'm not worried about it, but it looks more like a CGI rendering. Looks like it was rendered by computer, which is, I guess that's acceptable, but I still would rather have made it look more like a painting. And there's a style that I'm trying to work on here that I can't seem to quite capture yet. Just enough brush strokes in it to make it look like it was a painting, but not so many brush strokes that it just looks like a, like a, I don't know, a Monet or something like that. So there's sort of a balance I'm trying to strike here. I don't want it to be impressionistic. So it is kind of one of those, well. So today, this is the last show for the week, I guess, for us, because we're going to go into the Thanksgiving holiday. For those of you who are overseas or not American, this Thursday is the Thanksgiving holiday, and that's when we all overeat. Not like we don't do that normally, but we specifically overeat. We have an entire holiday dedicated to overeating. No, that's not true. It's only true for me. The truth is that it's a holiday where we give thanks for all the things that we've got and try to kind of reflect on where we are in life and things like that, which is great. So, the Thanksgiving holiday is a Thursday. Generally speaking, everybody takes the Friday off, and my family is going to take the Friday off too. So, since my family is going to take the Friday off, I'm going to go on ahead and take this Friday off as well. And then that way, I could be with my family all day, and you guys can be with your families, and that will be great. Except that this is COVID, and probably nobody will actually be with their families, which is kind of sad. So we'll work on that. We'll get there. Everybody will get there. And there are vaccines in the work, so that's a good thing. So today, I wanted to work on some of the concepts, the higher concepts that we were going to be working on with my comic book. And I was thinking about some of these things yesterday. I had listened to a fascinating podcast called The Pod Collective, which is, yeah, mac and cheese. Yeah, I get that. I hear you, my friend. I hear you. Put some chicken in it and fancy it up. There you go. Now you have fancy mac and cheese. Or put a slice of, cheddar on top of it or something. But listen to a podcast called The Pod Collective, which is a podcast from the actual CBS Paramount folks, and it's all about Star Trek. So it's an interesting podcast. There used to be another podcast earlier, but this is a new one started by them, and it stars Tawny Newsome, who is Mariner from Lower Decks, and she's on there as one of the hosts. And they had an interesting discussion yesterday where they were talking about the guest that was on was a gentleman who was a theologist, somebody who studies religions, and he's a major Trekkie, card-carrying Trekkie, and his favorite episode is Darmok. And that's an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. in which, for those of you who are not familiar with it, Picard meets a race of people called the Tamarins, and the children of Tamar. And these Tamarins are only speak in metaphor. And he had mentioned a very interesting thing. This religious guy, who is a religious major, he said, first of all, it's hard to pin down religion, right? For a long time, religion hadn't been pinned down, because is religion belief in gods? Well, then how does Buddhism fit in, right? Because that doesn't have a god. And is religion about the supernatural or about spirits? Then where does Taoism fit in? Both of those are verified religions. We call them religions, but they don't fit. So how do you quantify a religion? He had said that he came up with a theory that religion is a series of symbols that are transmitted between people where they share the same faith or belief, right? And that's really all the religion is. One could argue that Star Trek is a religion in that definition. One could argue that Star Wars is a religion. It's a series of symbols that are transmitted back and forth. The fact that I can do this and people know what this means that there's symbols going back and forth between Trekkies. So it made me start to think about that. And what he had said was you could see the evolution in the symbols in that episode. When you're talking about Darmok, it starts out with Dathan, the captain, saying things that didn't make sense. He was saying Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra, and he was talking about something, but they couldn't figure out what it was. And so by the end of the episode, spoilers, by the end of the episode, of course, if you haven't seen this episode aired in 93, or 91, I guess, so it's been a long time. But by the end of the episode, you've gotten to the point where you realize that what he was saying was Darmok was this guy who couldn't communicate with this other guy, right? Jalad. And so they put Jalad and Darmok on this island where they had to fight a beast. And the beast in this island was called Tanagra. And they learned to communicate with each other through a shared experience. And the whole point here is that he's like, the thing that this guy was talking about that was fascinating to me was Data was on his way to figuring out the language. But he couldn't express it. Because the truth of the matter is the whole language wasn't really about, it was about allegory. It was about being able to communicate a concept and an idea. Amongst the Trekkies, if I say Loxana Troy, all of us understand what that means. If we say Kai Wen, we all understand what that means. Even if even if you're not as familiar, that person over there is a definite Kai Wen, right? There's a whole bunch of subverted subplots to that we would understand. It's a symbol that's been moved over. If I say that person's a Garrick, then you totally get this entire subgroup of information. You get the feeling of the character, the feeling of what that person is, as opposed to having to explain that he's shifty, but he's probably, his heart's in the right place, but you probably can't trust him, but, like all of that stuff, like you'd have to explain if you said that somebody was like a Garrick. So that's kind of an interesting thing. This entire thing really made me open my eyes to a lot of the concepts of where a culture would be in position in the world. And one of those things is that it's not just that we're sharing memes with one another. Memes, right? It's that we're actually expressing and conveying entire concepts with these words. And so I was thinking we're going to have to come up with something like that for the comic too. There's going to have to have been a shift in the world. It's going to have to have changed in some way. So that's the thing that I think is something I've been pondering now. They won't be talking about, I mean, unlike, and it's actually, now that I think about this, it's something that Star Trek struggles with. Because the allegories that they keep coming up with are always 20th century, not just 20th century, but the last, say, 20 years of the 20th century allegories. Because they are trying to communicate back and forth with their audience. The allegories wouldn't make sense if you were outside this position. So the question really is now, how do you set up a world that is legitimately 500 years in the future and not make an alien landscape for the readers? How do I express the allegories that would need to be there without, I mean, because you think about it now, if we went back in time 500 years to 1500 and met up with, say, Galileo, even if you went back to 1600, you met up with Galileo and he was trying to explain how his telescope worked, and you kept saying things yeah. One blanket and they're put on a small island. See ya. Yeah, but Enemy Mine is a great example of that. So in a way, you could almost do that, right? I mean, we do that in an allegory. Oh, you're watching Darmok? Yeah, Darmok, it was, Picard couldn't communicate with this captain. And so the captain beamed him down to this planet so that they could have a shared enemy. Oh, you mean Enemy Mine, right? We would say that by allegory in the same way. Because you're right, bringing up Enemy Mine, that's exactly what Dathon did. Forced Enemy Mine. So that's exactly the concept and the thought process, but this guy is quantifying it so well. So I'm kind of pondering this. By the way, the camera over there has disconnected. It disconnected when I opened the curtains. So I'm going to have to restart the computer in order to make the camera start again. So we're not doing warm-ups this morning because I'm not over there. I can't get over there. It just shows black. See? Sigh. Oh well. Oh well. We'll get started again. It's the cable that goes between the computer and that table back there is an older cable, so it's probably time for me to replace it. We'll have to see. So anyway, yeah, the allegory. We go back in time to see Galileo, and we say, oh man, whenever he says it's difficult, he hauls his, even if we could speak the same language, right? He hauls the telescope out and says, oh yeah, it's difficult to use the telescope first thing in the morning. The cold air makes it difficult inside, and you say, yeah, my Ford does the same thing, right? To him, the word ford means to cross a river. So, he may even go, maybe a Georgia attack. It might have been a Georgia attack. I don't know. He was out and about in the house last night and kind of being a pest. Although he was trying to be less destructive last night. That was nice of him. But you say that, And Galileo's going to look at you like you you have a problem with crossing rivers first thing in the morning? Because even with a literal translation, you have to go through understanding that Ford became a name, and then the name became a person. That person then invented cars, and cars, which is a concept he would not even have any clue about, would continue to be all the way through. And that's a fascinating sub thought, and I hadn't even thought of that. Where would we be? And if you go 500 years from now into 2600, and you look at 2600 or 2500, anywhere in there, where would they be relative to us? There would be an entire nomenclature that would exist that didn't exist before. I mean, not just the science fiction nomenclature being spaced and, you know, and warping around and whatever else like that. That we know we would have a nomenclature like that, but there'd be, you know, oh, you're being just like Burp Zop Deeble who's the singer that did that one thing, right? And, because it's our shared universe, we'd be like, oh yeah, there's nothing worse than Burp Zop, And we'd be like, oh yeah, that was a horrible thing. I'm not doing that, or whatever. I mean, you'd have your own nomenclature. Not only that, we'd have an evolution. It would evolve. The concepts in the world would evolve. Gosh, the memes that my kid are talking about are different than the memes that I talked about. We've got different memes, and that's just one generation down. If I were to pop out of the world and pop back in just when my great-grandkids were around, they'd be completely incomprehensible, even though we're all speaking the same language. We'd all be speaking English, they'd be my great-grandkids, so we'd all, But even that, they'd be like, Dad, great-granddad, don't be such a burple-bop. And you'll be like, what? Yeah. Right? We would definitely have to avoid the Inquisition. We're going to go visit Galileo, but quick, avoid the Inquisition. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. I'm just saying. So, yeah, these are all things that kind of make me ponder. Some real thinkables here, Where would the world be? And how do I make it accessible? I'm having the same problem with the aliens. I went on ahead and decided to be absolutely realistic, or at least as realistic as my mind could go, with my alien life forms here. But the first few things that came to mind were, one, oxygen isn't the easiest thing to find in the universe. It's there, but it burns so well in stars that it tends to not exist as a full atmosphere on a planet unless the planet evolved plants. If the planet evolved plants, we're doing good. This is one of the reasons why no one's looking for planets out there with oxygen. They're looking for planets with water. And that's an important distinction because, of course, the truth is there's probably not enough water or not enough oxygen out there. Oxygen tends to get put into birthing nebulas, and then it tends to get sucked into stars where it's burned. So most planets we're going to find are going to be carbon dioxide based. So I made the other mammalian type characters, my mammalian type life forms. The other two, one doesn't care. It's not anaerobic, so it doesn't breathe. So it doesn't care. It can stay in the oxygen atmosphere. That's fine. It can stay in water. That's also fine. But the other one is like a rabbit-sized or maybe a large cat-sized or dog-sized creature of some sort which breathes carbon dioxide. And that one is aerobic at some point, and so it needs to breathe carbon dioxide. And then I have the other races, the race that lives on high pressure gas giants, so they can't even exist in this environment. It would cause them to explode, quite literally, because they just don't have enough pressure. It'd be like us getting the bends, or us going into space. I guess we wouldn't explode in space, but we definitely would have a bad day. Then you have a race of aliens that lives in space. They're spaceborne creatures. They can't live in this atmosphere. This is way too heavy of an atmosphere, right? So with all of these races that are logical, I have the same problem going for this one. How do I make them realistic? How do I make them approachable? Not just realistic, but approachable. Obviously, the critters that breathe carbon dioxide will just have a gas mask on. They live at the same pressure, but they just have a gas mask on, so they have to breathe carbon dioxide instead of breathing oxygen. And, with some adjustment, they might be able to even live in our atmosphere, because there's enough carbon dioxide in our atmosphere to breathe that. So there's that. The spaceborne creatures and the gas giant creatures both have a different issue. So my thought was, I'm just going to put a hologram system everywhere. So when you're down in the little subterranean deck, below deck, where the little high pressure people live, because they're only about this big, when you're down there, you'd see a little teeny hollow of you, and they'd talk to you. And up on above deck, the creature just appears, and you're standing here, and it's floating in the middle of the air. And you get used to that. The same with the space creatures. They just appear, and they talk to you, and then they leave. And I think that treating it like they're all just the same intelligence, and they all talk the same, and there isn't any real weird alien, they don't sit there and go, oh, blah, 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 when they talk to you or anything. They just say, hey, Bob, how you doing? No, I'm doing great. How are you doing, Jim? I'm doing fine. The other day we were talking over some beers and da-da-da-da-da, and, no, I hate the taste of beer, whatever. It doesn't really matter. So, thinking about that, that's probably the way I'm going to handle it. So how do we handle the fact that they're not drinking beer, but they're drinking bleep blop or whatever, something different. They've got an evolution. And maybe they wouldn't talk about beer, or maybe they would talk about beer, or these are all the things that make me ponder. So let's switch over to the monitor. We've got this going here. And let's talk about construction for one. One thing I really want to work on here is deciding exactly how some of these creatures look. I've already kind of decided what the Jacine look like, because they have these petals that sort of open up like this. The Jacine are the creatures that live in high pressure gas giants, right? And they've got manipulators that come out sort of like tentacles like this, right? They've got they open like petals sort of thing like this. So we know that they have a certain amount of, and the reason they need tentacles is because all creatures, in order to evolve intelligence of any sort, need to be able to manipulate their environment. And it's not like that's a given, but you could use telepathy to manipulate your environment. You don't have to have hands, but one of the reasons why, we've got other creatures on this planet that are very intelligent. We've got dolphins, we've got whales, we've got a number of creatures, but the fact that they can't manipulate their environment means that they don't have computers and cars and airplanes and such. Thank you. And so that is sort of part of the problem is, you need to be able to manipulate your environment to build a structure around you, and a need to do that. Nothing happens in the oceans that requires dolphins to build shelters. The oceans are pretty slow moving, relatively speaking, so you don't get ocean storms like you do above water level. There are predators, certainly, but the first need would be to get out of the rain for us. So we got out of the rain. There's a theory that says that we spent some time in the water. And I actually really rather like the water ape theory as far as a theory goes. It's a fascinating concept. And it was brought to my attention by Desmond Morris, who was a zoologist, anthropologist, and he studied humans as if we were animals. So, he would study us like a zoologist would. And I found that fascinating, as opposed to studying humans as from the point of view of humans. He tried to be as if he were an alien with a human specimen that he had to study, And that was interesting. He had a lot of very interesting things going for him. But a lot of the things he talked about in the way we operate, the way we think, what we do, some of the stuff that he talked about was downright terrifying. So, he would talk about the fact that humans, certain aspects of human art and things like that, were based on attracting the opposite sex. And that made my work somewhat more disturbing all of a sudden. And so there was some really funny things in that show. Anyway, so he talked a lot about a lot of the theories that we had with where we came from. And there was a theory about us being water apes. And I've talked to anthropologists a couple of times about this, and they usually just, psh, yeah. And I'm like, okay, why? Well, because it's a stupid theory. And I'm like, okay. But why won't it work? What's the standing proof? The water ape theory says that we spent a significant portion of our time in the water. Yep, exactly. Antenna, whiskers, lobes, tentacles, pheromones, telepathy, motions are all communications. And that's actually what I was thinking here was, like, this is the Jacine, and the Jacine would have color bands that mean something. So they don't communicate in the same way. But since they're a hologram, and they're hovering above the ground here, they would just wiggle their tentacles in different ways. And their colors would and the computer would say, hello, how are you? And it would sound like they had a voice. I'm sure that there would be some concessions. Every one of these creatures would have a voice print certification sort of thing, so that whenever it talks, it would speak in the same voice. So this one would have a high-pitched female voice, that one would have a low-pitched male voice, this one would have a low-pitched female voice, yada, yada, yada. And then that way, when they come up behind you and go, hey, can you please switch this on? You'd be like, yeah, Bob, sure, no problem. I'll switch it on for you. And you know it's Bob without having to go, who are you? Oh, you're Bob. Okay. You know. So I'm sure it would have just a slight, that way, because I mean, it would be the computer could concede to the humans on the human side. And I'm sure that when we talk in the Jacine world, we'd just be sitting there with colors just all over our faces. So that'd be kind of cool. It'd be actually kind of cool to have that discussion at some point in time, looking at the world in the Jacine collection underneath on the deck below on all of your ships. So that'd be kind of cool. I wonder if they would need light sources of any sort. I mean, because now I'm thinking about it. When we deal with the Polaris, right, we have the main deck floor and then the dome. And then in here is the city, right? And the city is where all the humans live. Right? And then like right through here, this would be the multiple deck Jacine collection. The Jacine all live down here. In this deck. Right? But this one could hold humans and I wonder if could we photosynthesis, yeah. How much carbon dioxide can we live on? Because right now we only breathe 26% oxygen. Most of what we're breathing right now is nitrogen. Right? Could we adjust humans so that they breathe a 50-50 mix, carbon dioxide and oxygen? Do we die of carbon dioxide poisoning because it poisons us, or do we die of carbon dioxide poisoning because it can't be mixed in the atmosphere and pushes all the oxygen above it? Carbon dioxide's heavier than O2, right? So if you introduce carbon dioxide into an oxygen environment, you're going to end up pushing all the oxygen to the top of the environment. But if you could take a carbon dioxide atom and an oxygen atom and use a Bergelblatt atom to merge the two together so that they're all one environment, could we still ingest 50% carbon dioxide and still use the 50% oxygen? There's a question. Because if you could, that means anybody coming forward from this time period would have a hard time breathing. But if you're acclimated, now I'm kind of curious. See, now all this pausing here is me thinking it through. Let's see. You know what we have? We have Mr. Google. Let's look at Mr. Google and bring it up here. No. How inhaled carbon dioxide affects the body. Look at us. Okay. Hypocapnia, hypocarbia, is a physiological term for the condition of and the body's response to excessive carbon dioxide. When CO2 is breathed into the lungs, it dissolves in the water there, diffuses across the alveolar capillary membrane, and enters the bloodstream. As it combines with water, it forms carbonic acid, making the blood acidic. So CO2 in the bloodstream lowers the blood pH. When CO2 levels become excessive, a condition known as acidosis occurs. This is defined as a pH of a blood becoming less than 7.35. The body maintains the balance mainly by using bicarbonate ions in the blood. So the body is apparently fighting off the CO2, acidosis. I know this isn't very exciting, guys, but I'm curious about all of this. Right? That's what I'm thinking. It looks like it ionizes the blood. So, an increase of plasma chloride, potassium, calcium, and sodium can occur. In the bloodstream, CO2 concentration is also controlled by reversible reactions with two major blood components, plasma proteins and hemoglobin. So it looks like you could, over generations, naturally evolve a more robust CO2 mechanism. And this is in fact the opposite of hyperventilation, which causes too little CO2 and results in alkalosis. So we'd have to, if we were to make humans that could live in a higher CO2 atmosphere, where we take that 78% nitrogen and introduce... They do that through photosynthesis. So, which you just said, 2 points up, right? But that's a different biological process, and we're not very compatible with plants, sadly. What I'm wondering is, if we're going to talk techie stuff here, right? We're going to be super techie about these things. What if we were to say we have a device that sits in our bloodstream that simply produces more of, it's a more robust version of our existing CO2 system, which allows, well, I mean, either that or the other creatures breathe nitrogen. That's plausible. What if they breathe nitrogen? So the little cat-like creatures breathe nitrogen, which is perfect for us because we breathe nitrogen all the time. In fact, we breathe mostly nitrogen. This atmosphere right now is almost all nitrogen. Because it's 78%, almost 80% nitrogen. It's only a small amount of oxygen. Or what if they breathe... The problem is carbon dioxide is so prevalent. I mean, because could you... I would think... Right, that's what I was thinking too, is that what you do is just try to offset the acidosis that occurs in the blood, right? This would be dramatic if you brought anybody into this environment from Earth. They would live in this environment for 5-10 minutes before they got acidosis in the blood. So you'd need to get them to a hospital and get them the triox compound or whatever is, our version of that. But what if we took, and in here, let's get ourselves a pen, huh? And in here we had an environment that was 20% O2 and 20% CO2, right? And then 60% nitrogen. What if that was our mix? Right? Because this is a diving problem too. You're talking about that right there. You're talking about diving. Divers have this problem all the time. And the difference is bicarbonate. That's what these ions in blood help break down the acid and yeah, the animals would need to be adjusted. Never do need to be adjusted. Because right now we are at 0.04. Right? So that's a significant boost of carbon dioxide. Then we'll have to have a magical thing to keep the CO2 from falling. So here's a side thing for those of you who are wondering. We sent a probe to Mars called MAVEN. And the MAVEN probe, that was its job, was to determine what had happened on Mars in the history, through the atmosphere and things like that. And some cataclysm occurred on Mars that we knew something had happened on Mars to cause it to do what it did. But there were a lot of theories, and we needed MAVEN to prove it. So MAVEN went to Mars and has been orbiting Mars. And it's been scanning, doing different tests on the atmosphere and on the structure of the planet and things like that. And the current theory is that Mars used to have an oxygen environment. It had to, because everything rusted. I mean, that's why the planet's red, is because it's all iron. The dust is iron. And iron only turns rusty when brought in contact with oxygen. It oxidizes. That's actually what it does. So there had to have been oxygen on Mars somewhere along the line, otherwise the planet wouldn't be rust colored. So we had to figure out why. What happened to it? Because now there's no oxygen there at all. And what MAVEN sort of figured out, or is still in the process of figuring out, but this is the leading theory, is that Mars used to have a liquid core, just like ours. But the liquid core has cooled. And now it's not there anymore, which meant that the magnetic field no longer exists. Mars doesn't have a magnetic field. You take a a compass to Mars, and you sit it there, and it'll just go wee 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 wee, and because there's no polar north, there's no magnetic field. Without the magnetic field to push the solar wind away from the planet and to push the UV radiation away, then it started to break down the oxygen that was in the atmosphere. And it didn't break down the carbon dioxide, just the oxygen. And the more the carbon dioxide was broken down and released into space, the more the carbon dioxide dropped below the oxygen, pushing the oxygen up. Carbon dioxide is heavier. And so the carbon dioxide would drop and the oxygen will go up. This is one of the reasons why we're mostly concerned with carbon dioxide production here on Earth, is there could, as carbon dioxide is heavier than oxygen, there could come a point where everything below 1 foot on the ground will kill you, because you go into this acidosis, and all the carbon dioxide, we've made so much carbon dioxide that it makes a 1 foot layer on the planet underneath the oxygen, which is exactly what happened on Mars. So there's a concern about the generation of carbon dioxide. We've got to stop generating so much that it tips the balance, because if it gets to 1% or 2% of our atmosphere, all of it's going to fall to the earth and be on the bottom, and we'll have an ocean of carbon dioxide, and you won't be able to lay down in a bed on the floor. If you lay down on the floor, you'll pass out and die. And so, anyway, so that could be exactly like water and oil. Because water's heavier than oil. So there is a concern there. So we've got to figure out some magical force that doesn't allows a mix like this. We'll have to, and that could just be tech, right? It's okay if they have, snurdobertolene that they have to mix into the air to make it work. Right? Nitrogen works well as an inert gas. It keeps it from burning. Too much oxygen in our atmospheres catch on fire. So pure oxygen atmospheres, as we've learned from Apollo and Apollo 1, certainly, pure oxygen environments are bad. So we keep the nitrogen in there just to keep it inert gas. So we'd want something like that. Okay, so the widget, if I were to bring you forward in time and throw you into this dome, you'd have to have a bicarbonate injection to increase the ions in your blood, otherwise you get acidosis. Right? Okay. Otherwise, acidosis. Cis. There we go. In blood. And I think we call that the bends. And if I'm not mistaken, and I might be mistaken, people at high altitudes that are not acclimated, these are pilots without supplemental oxygen, travelers to high altitudes, because there's less available oxygen to breathe, can become unconscious due to the lack of oxygen without ever having a sensation of air hunger. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, certainly that would be the way I would have it. I mean, we're in the future here, right? You could probably just hit the replicator and go, replicate 400 liters of oxygen. Okay. Replicate 300 liters of CO2. You know, I'm sure that they, in some kind of atom manipulation, you just keep adding atoms until it, you start with your helium or your hydrogen. You load hydrogen into the system, and then they add atoms to it until it becomes an oxygen atom. Then you've got an oxygen atom, and it happens in like a second or two. I'm trying not to hand wave too much because, of course, I agree with you we should think these things out. You didn't say that, but I thought it, and I thought that for you. Anyway, so that's interesting because we've got to think. So they're going to have this bicarbonate that needs to be injected into their blood if they're not part of the environment. The rest of us would just develop a more robust bicarbonate system to keep our blood pH correct. And blood pH acidosis. I really want to write this with a C. And it's probably because it's acid. But, so blood pH of less than 7.35 is acidosis. There we go. So, this is not the most exciting show to watch me draw. However, this is a lot of the stuff that a lot of the writers in this world go through because someone out there is going to be a nurse or a doctor. And if I have somebody go, oh no, this person's not used to the mixed environment that we've got here. Quick, give them a shot of, berberine. And what's berberine? I don't know. But their blood pH is at like 27. And then people will be like, well, that doesn't make sense. It makes it so that you can understand the logic behind what might happen there. You should see this document that I'm building here. It's got a ton of these things. So, there we go. We've figured out sort of the problem going on with breathing this atmosphere. And we need to give bicarbonates to the humans. And I think that the other race will need some kind of, maybe they live with an acidosis in their blood of some sort. This presumes that they've got a blood. They may not. The other anaerobic culture, though, this is cool because then it shows that we could make, we make concessions for the alien races. The alien races make concessions for us. But the best part about this, though, is I think if we had a system in our body, a machine that you're injected with when you are born, that sits there and what would affect skin tones and pigments? Sunlight, UV radiation? That's mostly what changes our skin tone and pigment anyway, is sunlight. It involves the melanin in our skin, and that's the little pigments that change colors so that we alter and change the tone of skin. But that wouldn't affect it by CO2. But we could have And this could be a device, the thing that lives like right here in our body, and it lives under the skin, kind of like a pacemaker, but it lives like under the rib or something. So it just sits in there, and a couple of blood vessels go into it and go out of it, and it changes the acidosis of our blood and alters it depending on what we're breathing. And you could actually probably have it alterable. You know what I mean? Like, it just reactionarily affects your blood value. So, this planet's got, only 5% oxygen and a lot of carbon dioxide, like Mars. You go out on Mars, and okay, it's brutal, it's pretty rough, but the little widget in there just starts adjusting until you've got enough oxygen in your blood that you're not going to fall over dead. And maybe you could even have, like, you wear a tank on your back, and it just presses oxygen into your skin or something like that. And maybe the device lives just under your scapula, or just to the right of it, so that if you put a oxygen tank on your back, then the oxygen tank would just slowly ooze oxygen into your skin, which would be picked up by this device, and the device could continue to wash out the acidosis. Interesting. So that way, humans could, anything that's within pressure for humans that the humans can withstand, and is an O2 CO2 of some sort, they wouldn't need any kind of supplemental oxygen. Right? Thus giving us the effect we see in Star Trek of everybody just walking around on all these planets, Because not all of the planets are going to be that way. I like this. This is cool. And I like thinking through the widgets here, right? So, you have the scapula here, and the scapula here, right? And here's our spinal cord, and the ribs going out this way. Right, and going forward into the rib cage up front up here. And what you have, here's the arm bone. There's the other arm bone right there. And then right up here is the collarbone, right up there. And what we have is the device either lives right in here, in one of your scapula, and in fact, that's probably the best place for it, would be the device living right here. And then that way, it's in that bone. And it helps, structurally strengthen the bone. But it also is a converter. Right? Converter. Right? There we go. Because I'm a completionist. Okay. It's a break time. Oh, you didn't even see that, did you? Here, let's put it on the monitor real quick. So what I did was add it over here, just bringing in, putting it into the scapula like that. So the device lives inside the scapula. And then the blood circulates in. Let's make that red. The blood circulates in. It checks the condition of the ions and then circulates it back out into the system. Yeah, I think that would work. And then all you do is when you're born, you have a little bit of a surgery of some sort where they, cut a hole in the scapula, put this in, let it heal back up, and all is good. And then you can live in any environment. And I think most of us, probably the people who live on planets and things like that, they'd need that for all kinds of different things, depending on what the planetary system is. So, okay, it's time for a quick break. So let's do what we usually do. Let's stand up. Oh my goodness. Goodness. And we stretch. There we go. And we'll walk around. And we'll walk back. We'll walk over here. And like we do every day, we'll look outside for a minute. That's a lovely day. Pretty day outside, all's good. Still snow out there, I see. But that's okay. We'll walk back. Okay. Okay. And now we're back. All right. So, there we go. So the mix of the air shouldn't be at 14 psi either, because I feel like that would be so the pressure here, we'll make it less. What's the psi rating of Colorado? So we're at 12. Right? Do the eyes need protection if the CO2 is too high? I can't imagine that. I mean, I would guess that there would be a certain amount of irritation. But that's a good question. And could we just wear like contacts or something like that? And this could be another interesting thing, because we could say that the G.S.Davis don't do that. Maybe the G.S.Davis don't have the 20% CO2 in their air, right? They just have the 20% O2, and then it's 80% N2. And that means that we can experiment with explaining all of this through our G.S.Davis character Mayrel, right? She comes aboard and says, this atmosphere is difficult for me to breathe, and yada yada yada. And she's gotten acclimated to it, but it took some time, and I could see that. That seems like a kind of an interesting idea and concept that'd be difficult. Do the eyes need protection, though? That's the question. Genetic differences may alter carbon dioxide sensitivity. No. Somebody has, in fact, done this experiment, Donald. Oh, man, that's funny. So, it looks like if you're under 40 years of age, you are more likely to be sensitive to CO2 in the eyes. Elderly subjects are not as sensitive to CO2 in the eyes, which means that your answer is yes, we could probably adjust to it. And then they did nasal air irritants. Fascinating. So, apparently, high CO2, good thinking, irritates young eyes. Mayrell's pretty young, so she might have eye irritation for a while and have to have special eye drops because she probably is irritated by the high levels of CO2 and constantly, this just hurts, constantly wiping her eyes and things like that. Fascinating. So, they don't need protection, though. I mean, they don't need necessarily protection, it just causes irritation. But that's still intriguing. As a fair warning, I'm going to leave show early today, just a little bit, because we've got to go to the store, and while we're out, might as well get lunch and things like that for the boy and I. So we're going to head out a little early so that we can get moving and get kind of in process of that. So this is my thought experiment for the day. We're going to end the week on this because I think this is a great way to end the week. I love thinking. World building has been so much fun. It really has. So I'm fascinated by the fact that we've done this world building, and it's interesting to me that all this thought process, like if they've got these different cultures and different environments and things like that, that's true. They could have contacts that cover the entire eyes and shield in. They may just spray coat your eyes, by some kind of, okay, well, open your eyes. Psh, there you go. It hurts. Yeah, but it'll only hurt for about 1 minute, and then you can, it'll never hurt again, and then the little spray stuff on your eyes just merges with the cells of your eyes ultimately, and becomes another hardened substance. But it does mean that if you come from Earth, you've got you're going to have a hard time dealing with the environment. I mean, one, you'd have an immediate problem because that bicarbonate, that you need that bicarbonate ion going in your blood. Otherwise, you're just going to have acidosis, and your pH level will drop. You'll go into acidosis. Nasty stuff will happen. Unless you have the widget on the collarbone right back here. Some fascinating things here. But compromising to live with the other creatures, I mean, some of it there's no compromise. You just cannot live at the high pressure environment of the Jacine. And that's these guys here. These are the Jacine. Right? We can't live. They live in a high pressure environment. And they float. They float in their gas giant. Or nanites. There could be some kind of biological nanite. It introduces a unique and interesting problem to everybody. Right? The other thing I've been thinking about was transporters. I have a story that is around transporters, built around, transporters from Star Trek, because it was a Star Trek story. And the problem I've got is that I really don't want transporters per se. So I was thinking of something where you have a DNA resequencer that puts all the telomeres back on your DNA and resequences your DNA back to where it was, and it's a life extension program. So it's designed to extend your life, because nothing we can do if you get blown up in space. But if we can reassemble the telomeres in the bottom of your DNA and put them back on so that you don't die of old age anymore, then theoretically you could live 200 or 250 or 300 years, in theory. Sort of like Honor Harrington's prolong concept. With the biological setup that I'm trying to kind of come up with here is thinking it through to, is there a machine where you stand in the machine just scans you and then reassembles all of your DNA. Hey, kiddo, we're going to go to lunch in a little bit. I'm going to finish my show in 15 minutes, and then we're going to go to lunch, okay? Don't come over here. Go that way.
Do you mean go out to lunch or have lunch here?
No. Go that way.
Go out to lunch.
Uh-huh.
I see.
So don't eat anything downstairs.
All
right. That had to be an explanation. So these are all things that I'm thinking about is like there's nanites or something, a machine that allows you to reconstruct your structure so that you are back to where you at your zero state. So you're 17 years old, you're too young to zero state. But once you turn, let's say 20 or 25, maybe 25, that's when everything settles in your body. Your brain is fully developed. Every part of you is ready to go. Biologically, that's where you're locked in. So at 25, you go in and you get this scan of your body. And then they save it on a chip. Here's your chip. And then every 5 years or 10 years, you go back in, put the little chip in, and it restores everything to where you were at 25. So biologically, you stay 25 years old. Yeah, it repairs all the damaged cells. If you if you are a heavy drinker, it restores your liver, puts it back where it belongs. You know, things like that. It removes cancers, um, destroy any kind of aberration in the system, knocks those out. But by constitution, it can't do anything more than that. We a while back, you remember we talked about the Constitution rights, and we're not allowed by constitutional structure to play God. So I can't change you from, if you've got green eyes and you want blue eyes, we can't change that. If you've got brown hair and you want black hair, we can't change that. But if you've got cancer, we can pull that out. So I think if nothing else, that would be intriguing. Would be a story where we could talk about someone who breaks that rule. Someone who puts the construction of a human being in their hands. It's an interesting thought process. So, anyway, that's something to kind of ponder as well. I have a story called "Sins of the Father" that's, I want to say it's 10-ish issues in on the comic here, and that's a lot of what that's addressing is that particular part, genetic manipulation and the morality therein. So, see, that's the thing, right? It can't change your neurons. It shouldn't change your neurons. But wouldn't that be a wild one? You keep waking up. It's like Groundhog Day. Except that the world keeps moving forward. You keep waking up on that Monday when you're 25 years old. Oh, that could be almost like a dysfunction, or like a one of the psychoses or problems that occurs. Is every millionth person or whatever is perpetually stuck at Groundhog Day. And maybe you end up doing a choice at that point in time. Ooh, think about that. Okay, so your there is a 5% chance or 1% chance or even less than that. Let's say it's a 0.5% chance that when you do this, the save point function here, you will always return to the save point in your brain. It'll wipe out your memories. So 5 years later, you go back in and you get the restore, and it restores your body to 25, and you walk out and you're like, okay, so how long do I have to do this? And they record what you say when you walk out of the, or they ask you what the date is, right? And you walk in, it's Tuesday, 2020. It's November 25th, 2020. Okay, and so I go in, and I come out and I'm like, it's, December 14th, 2005. And then you're like, uh-oh, that didn't go well. Right? Something's gone wrong. So, if you are one who's genetically or biologically susceptible to that, you have a choice. You can prolong, but only if you're aware that every 5 years you're going to lose that 5 years as you move down in time. So you could choose to live your entire life out, and then when you're 90, prolong. But it's going to reset you to being 25. That's an interesting idea. So you'd have people in society who are old because sometimes this treatment doesn't work for you. And so these people have chosen to live their lives out, have kids, watch them grow, watch them move out. And at some point in their lives, they're going to have to make the decision to either reset and go back to 25 and start effectively their lives all over again. Wow. That'd be an interesting story, wouldn't it? I'm going to write that down. Thank you, Donald. That was a brilliant concept. Prolong. What if they reset memories? Groundhog Day at 25 years old. So there's another thing to bring us full circle about what they were talking about in the podcast I was talking about, and that is we have. Are you leaving us? Are you leaving us? Oh, we're coming up on 11:30. Yep. So, wrapping up my long talk for the day, because I've been rambling most of the day, but I've come up with some great ideas. Thank you so much, Donald. You've been great. You've been helping me think these things through. Sometimes I just need to talk to somebody and think things through, and I really enjoy it. Anyway, the wrapping this up, Groundhog Day. That's another one of those where we have a shared experience, and I don't need to say and explain to you. Right, Captain Pike being restored by the Telosians. But I don't need to explain it to you. As a shared culture, I can just say, so they Groundhog Day every, at the end of their life. So they go out 5 years, and they Groundhog Day back to being 25 years old again. And you know what that means. And all of that, the Bill Murray being frustrated and being mad and being aggravated and screwing around and all those parts you get as part of the feel. That's what he was saying was the Tamarians would be doing, they're trying to express the feeling to you, which I find fascinating. So we have to think of these. So back to our original cultural problem, we're going to have to think about some of this cultural stuff. I'll report back to you on Monday as to what I've thought of over these next 4 days. We're going to get a 4-day weekend where we're all going to enjoy our weekend and enjoy eating a lot and stuff. We're going to probably not do turkey this year because nobody's going to be here. And we're not going anywhere. And though my wife loves turkey a lot, I'm meh on turkey. And my son's not big on turkey at all. I like ham better. But my wife doesn't eat ham. And not for any reason other than her family didn't do ham when she was a kid. For whatever reason. They thought it was a bad idea. They read in a newspaper that it was bad for kids or something. But that's true. You could maliciously change the equipment. And that is what Code 47 is about. That's another issue of Bellatrix Rising. So we'll be reading about my thoughts on that right there, my friend. You and I were thinking alike right there. But I have a whole story about that one. Not about tampering for eyewitness accounts, but same kind of thing. Yeah, leftover turkey sandwiches are cool. My mom had an issue with making the turkey way too dry. She was born and raised in Texas and had a rough time up here in Colorado. So she had a problem with the altitude. She had a problem with adjusting her baking processes. Um, because that messed with and the lack of moisture in our air. So the turkey was always dry, and so I didn't like turkey that much when I was a kid. Um, my wife has figured out a really good way to make turkey juicy, and I like it, but it takes a lot of effort on her part. And so this year she's like, we don't have to do that. And so we might do steak, which is something I like to do because I can pan fry a steak really fast. Um, and steak's relatively cheap this time of year because nobody wants steak. They all want turkey and ham, which is what's really expensive. So it works out. So maybe we'll have a new tradition starting this year. Um, who knows? Who knows? Anything could happen. Right? So, all right. So we did an hour and a half here. And Donald, you were very instrumental in a lot of these concepts and thought processes. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Um, and I think this has been mayo, mayo, mayo. That's another thing that my wife never got into. Although what's funny is there's a Japanese mayo that is very different in taste, and I actually kind of like the Japanese mayo. And it's not as sweet; it's a little bit more tangy. And I don't know where to get it here in America. I haven't, obviously. I mean, I don't know. It might be at H Mart or at Packmark downtown. I don't know. Maybe we'll have to see. But anyway, we're gonna head on out and go do some quick shopping that has nothing to do really with anything other than we need rice. And so I am actually heading to H Mart. We'll have to see what happens. And I will see everybody again on Monday morning. And I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. Again, I will not be broadcasting tomorrow or Friday so that we can all hang out with our families, except all of you people who are not in America. And for all of you guys, I'm sorry. I promise I'll be broadcasting on your holidays, sadly, because we're just not unified on holidays yet. But we'll get there. We'll talk about holidays here. It's another cultural thing we're going to have to come up with. But either way, I will see you all on Monday. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and keep your eyes on the stars. Bye-bye.